I stood in that courtroom with my back straight and my eyes forward. Decades of service had trained me to never flinch, even when I was under fire. But this? This was a different kind of battlefield. My name is Marcus Rowe. 22 years in the Navy SEALs. I've been deployed to places so dark they don't even show up on maps. I've led missions no one will ever know about. And yet, somehow, here I was, on trial for a technicality involving a property dispute with a federal contractor. Nothing criminal. Just political. The courtroom was packed. Cameras. Reporters. Spectators. The judge, a stiff-jawed man in his 60s named Harold Kinsey, leaned back in his chair like a king eyeing a pawn. You think your military background entitles you to special treatment, he sneered, flipping through papers without looking up. You're in my courtroom now, Mr. Rowe. Not a war zone. So stand down. The gallery went silent. My lawyer, young and clearly rattled, barely moved a muscle. I stayed still. I've had insurgents yell worse. But Kinsey wasn't done. Sit up straight when I speak, he snapped. You're not in a barracks. I didn't respond. I just waited. I knew better than to take the bait. Still, something about this felt too deliberate. Like it was more than just arrogance, it felt like a setup. Then the judge did something no one expected. He pointed at me. Kneel, he said, voice cold. If you want leniency, show some humility. Kneel in this courtroom. A gasp rippled through the crowd. My heart pounded, but my face stayed like stone. Then, the doors burst open. And everything changed. The heavy courtroom doors slammed open with a force that silenced even the judge mid-sentence. Every head turned. There, standing tall in the entrance, was U.S. Senator Elijah Warner. The same Elijah Warner who served 3 terms on the Senate Armed Services Committee. The same man who once commanded a joint special operations task force before stepping into politics. And the same man I once pulled out of a burning convoy in Kandahar. He wasn't supposed to be in the state, let alone in this courtroom. But here he was, eyes locked on Kinsey with the fury of a man who had seen enough. Judge Kinsey, Warner barked as he stepped forward, his deep voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Did I just hear you demand that a decorated Navy SEAL kneel in your courtroom? Kinsey froze. His mouth opened, but no words came out. I'm going to give you exactly 3 seconds to explain yourself, Warner continued, walking straight up the center aisle. His security detail rushed to keep pace behind him, but no one dared stop him. Not even the bailiffs. Kinsey tried to recover. Senator Warner, with all due respect, this is highly irregular. No, Warner cut him off. What's irregular is you using that bench to degrade a man who's given more to this country than most ever will. The crowd was dead silent. Warner turned to the gallery. Ladies and gentlemen, I've sat in intelligence briefings you'll never hear about. I've seen the names of men who died for this nation. Marcus Rowe isn't just a veteran. He's the reason some of you are even standing here today. He then turned back to Kinsey. And you wanted him to kneel? I stood frozen, watching this unfold like I was outside my own body. For once in my life, I didn't know what was about to happen next. Then Warner stepped up to me and placed a hand on my shoulder. Not today, he said. Judge Kinsey's face turned a pale shade of gray. He tried to mask it with bluster, but the courtroom air had shifted, control was no longer in his hands. Senator Warner, Kinsey began, voice trembling ever so slightly, you are not a party to this proceeding. I must ask you to leave unless you have official business here. Warner didn't flinch. Oh, I have business here, he said calmly, stepping closer to the bench. You see, Judge, I requested to be notified of this hearing the moment Marcus Rowe's name showed up in your docket. And do you know why? Kinsey didn't respond. Because I authorized the mission that left shrapnel in this man's spine. Because I saw the classified report where he saved a team of intelligence officers from being overrun. And because I made a promise, in writing and in spirit, that this nation would never disgrace its warriors when they come home. The silence in the room deepened. Kinsey shuffled the papers in front of him, now visibly unnerved. I followed procedure. Warner cut him off. Procedure isn't the issue. It's the tone. The humiliation. You didn't treat him like a man with a legal issue, you treated him like a problem. Like someone beneath your courtroom. The judge's gavel hovered over the bench but never dropped. Then Warner reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. This is a formal request for judicial review. Signed by 3 senators and the Deputy Director of the Department of Justice. He slapped it onto the bench. The courtroom gasped. Effective immediately, Warner said, you are to recuse yourself from this case. Judge Kinsey sat back, stunned. His lips moved but no sound came. His authority, the very thing he'd used like a weapon just moments earlier, had vanished. And I just stood there, for the first time in a long time, speechless. The crowd began to murmur. Warner looked at me. We're not done yet, he said. You're going to walk out of this courtroom with your head held high. And I believed him. As the courtroom buzzed with whispers and disbelief, 2 federal clerks entered from a side door and approached the bench. One handed Kinsey a sealed envelope. The other quietly handed a copy of the recusal order to the court reporter. Judge Kinsey's hands shook as he opened the envelope. His eyes darted across the page, scanning line by line until he realized this wasn't just symbolic, it was real. It was happening. This is outrageous, he stammered. You're undermining the authority of the judiciary. No, Warner interrupted, his voice controlled but unyielding. We're restoring it. You brought this on yourself when you mistook the bench for a throne. The judge looked up at Warner, then at me. For a flicker of a moment, something like regret crossed his face, but it was too late. I suggest you step down quietly, Warner said, before the cameras outside start asking why a federal judge demanded that a war hero kneel before him. Kinsey rose slowly, pressing both hands to the arms of his chair like a man much older than he appeared. He glanced around, saw no allies, and finally spoke, I recuse myself, effective immediately. Gasps echoed through the gallery. The bailiff motioned toward the back, and Kinsey walked off the bench without another word. No gavel. No lecture. Just silence and footsteps. Then the crowd erupted. Some stood. A few applauded. Reporters scrambled for their phones. The judge was gone, but the moment remained electric. Warner turned to me. Come on, Marcus. Let's finish this right. He motioned to the new presiding judge just entering from chambers, a woman I didn't recognize, but whose eyes didn't carry the weight of prejudice or politics. As I sat back down beside my lawyer, who looked like he'd just been saved from drowning, Warner leaned in close and said one more thing, this country still remembers who you are. And now, so will they. Judge Monica DeWitt stepped up to the bench with measured grace and a face unreadable but firm. She had a reputation, fair, by the book, no nonsense. But most importantly, she had no tolerance for theatrics or power plays. She adjusted her glasses, glanced at the chaos that had unfolded, and tapped her gavel once. This court will come to order, she said, her voice even and composed. The gallery quieted instantly. She looked at the file briefly, then over to me. Mr. Rowe, I apologize on behalf of this court for the inappropriate conduct you were subjected to. That is not how justice works, not here, and not in any courtroom under the Constitution. Her words didn't have flair. They didn't need it. They carried something more powerful, dignity. She turned to my lawyer. Do you have the amended filing regarding the property rights claim? He nodded and stood, more confident now. Yes, Your Honor. All documents are in order. My client is fully compliant with the contractual terms. The opposing counsel has failed to meet discovery deadlines on 3 separate occasions. Judge DeWitt scanned the docket and raised an eyebrow. Then we're wasting time, she said. Motion to dismiss. Filed, Your Honor. Granted, she said, almost instantly. Case dismissed with prejudice. The words hit me harder than I expected. It was over. The courtroom broke into murmurs again, but this time it wasn't outrage, it was approval. Some were stunned silent. A few reporters left the room in a rush, already dialing into their stations. Cameras would be rolling within minutes. Warner extended a hand. I took it. You didn't deserve to walk in here alone, he said quietly. I nodded, my throat tight. Thank you, sir. You earned this long before I stepped in, he replied. As we turned to leave, Judge DeWitt's voice called out one last time, Mr. Rowe. I looked back. She stood from the bench. Thank you for your service. And in that moment, the courtroom, finally, felt like a place of justice. We stepped out of the courtroom into a flash of lights and a wall of voices. Mr. Rowe, how does it feel to have the case dismissed? Senator Warner, did you plan this intervention in advance? Will there be consequences for Judge Kinsey? Cameras lined the marble hallway like a gauntlet, but Warner raised a hand, commanding silence without saying a word. The reporters quieted just enough for him to speak. This is not about headlines, Warner said firmly. It's about integrity, something this man, he pointed to me, has demonstrated his entire life. He stood for this country in ways most never will. Today, we stood for him. I didn't expect to speak. I didn't plan to. But something made me step up to the microphones. I didn't come here for drama, I said plainly. I came for fairness. I paused, watching the crowd grow still. There are a lot of folks who wear a uniform and come home to find their battles aren't over. Some face silence. Some face closed doors. And some get told to kneel. I looked at Warner beside me, then back at the cameras. But today reminded me, there are still people who will walk through that door for you when it matters. People who don't forget who you are. A beat passed. No shouting. No flashbulbs. Just a rare, respectful quiet. Then we turned and walked away, not just from the reporters, but from something heavier. From the weight of being seen as a symbol, not a citizen. From the idea that silence was the only option. As we stepped outside into the warm light of the Capitol courtyard, Warner clapped me on the back. You're not done yet, Marcus, he said with a grin. I smiled for the first time that day. No, sir, I said. But this was a damn good start. 3 days later, the headlines still hadn't stopped. Senator intervenes in courtroom showdown, decorated seal vindicated after stunning legal reversal, Judge Kinsey under review after public outcry, but I wasn't reading them. I was sitting on a bench outside the VA hospital, watching the afternoon sun hit the bronze statue of fallen soldiers. I'd been there more times than I could count, sometimes for appointments, sometimes just for the quiet. This time, I wasn't alone. Senator Warner joined me, 2 cups of black coffee in hand. He handed one over without saying a word. We sat in silence for a while. Finally, he said, judicial review's been opened. Kinsey's already been placed on administrative leave. I nodded, letting the news settle in like distant thunder. And you? He asked. What now? I go back to helping the ones who don't have a senator storming into their courtroom, I said. This doesn't stop with me. He smiled. That's why I came in. We both knew this was bigger than one case. Bigger than one judge. It was about the silent battles that too many face when the uniform comes off. The invisible scars. The subtle dismissals. The quiet disrespect wrapped in legal language. That courtroom moment had lit a fuse, and others were already calling. Veterans groups. Legal watchdogs. Even young JAG officers reaching out, asking how to help. Later that week, I was asked to speak at a forum on veteran rights and judicial conduct. I didn't say much. Just this: dignity isn't optional. It's earned, and it's owed. The room stood. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was fighting alone. The true battle ends when we stand for each other. And now, we're standing. Weeks passed. What happened in that courtroom didn't fade, it grew. Clips of the confrontation circulated across every platform. Veterans from across the country started sharing their own stories: wrongful evictions, courtroom disrespect, forgotten medals, ignored service records. What had happened to me wasn't rare, it had just been public. And now the silence was breaking. A congressional subcommittee on judicial conduct and veteran affairs was convened. Warner invited me to testify. I didn't hesitate. When I walked into that hearing room in D.C., it felt familiar. Polished floors. Suits. The scent of paper and tension. But this time, I wasn't alone, and I wasn't on defense. I sat beside 3 other veterans, an Air Force pilot, a Marine logistics officer, and an Army combat medic. Each of them had their own story. Each one had been treated like their service was a footnote. When it was my turn to speak, I said, I didn't ask to be treated like a hero. I asked to be treated like a human being. The room went still. And what happened in that courtroom? That wasn't about one bad decision. It was about a system that's gotten too comfortable forgetting who fights for it. I looked at the senators across from me. Fix it. And I meant every word. That hearing led to something real, a bipartisan push for the Veterans Injustice Protection Act, a bill to ensure that veterans receive dignity and legal fairness, especially in civil disputes involving housing, benefits, or employment. Months later, the bill passed. And then something even more unexpected happened. A young law student I'd never met reached out. I was going to quit law school, she wrote. Then I saw what happened in your case. I changed my focus to advocacy. I want to stand for people the system forgets. That message hit harder than any headline ever could. Because sometimes, legacy doesn't come from medals. It comes from the echoes of one moment where you refused to kneel. Nearly a year had passed. The courtroom incident that once shook headlines was now studied in law schools, debated on cable panels, and printed in ethics textbooks. Judge Kinsey had formally resigned after a quiet but conclusive review. His name would not go down as infamous, just as a warning. As for me, I wasn't the same man who walked into that courtroom under scrutiny. I was still Marcus Rowe, SEAL, citizen, survivor, but now, something else had taken root. Purpose beyond the battlefield. I co-founded a nonprofit called Honor Before Verdict, pairing legal experts with veterans navigating the system. Not for charity, for equity. We didn't want favors. We wanted fairness. One morning, I stood outside a small courthouse in Tulsa, Oklahoma, watching a young Marine vet walk out with tears in his eyes, custody restored, housing secured, voice heard. He walked straight over to me and said, "You don't know me. But that video, your case, that's why I fought this time." I shook his hand. I didn't fight for recognition, I told him. I fought because someday, someone like you might need a courtroom that listens. He nodded. And then, for the first time in my life, someone called me something I never expected to hear. Not just a SEAL, he said. You're justice in motion. I never forgot that. Later that week, Senator Warner invited me to speak at a veterans gala in D.C. He introduced me with a single line: when the system told him to kneel, Marcus stood tall, and in doing so, he helped the system rise with him. The room erupted. I didn't say much that night. I didn't need to. Because this wasn't just my story anymore. It was ours. A year to the day after that courtroom standoff, I stood once again in front of the same courthouse. Not as a defendant. Not as a witness, but as a keynote speaker for the National Summit on Veterans and Justice Reform. The steps where I once walked in with a target on my back were now lined with flags, reporters, and veterans from every branch of the military. Some wore suits. Some wore uniforms. All of them carried something heavier than medals: experience. Senator Warner joined me on stage. He looked out over the crowd and said, "You all know what happened here a year ago. But what matters is what's happened since. We've rewritten more than a case. We've rewritten expectations." Then he turned to me. "And the man who lit that spark is here with us." When I stepped up to the podium, I didn't bring notes. I just brought the truth. I didn't want to become a story. I wanted a fair hearing. But the truth is, if we don't speak up when the system stumbles, we become part of its silence. I looked around. You don't have to be a senator to walk into a room and demand decency. You don't have to be a SEAL to stand your ground when someone tells you to kneel. You just have to remember who you are. The applause that followed wasn't loud, it was steady, strong, and full of understanding. Afterward, as people filtered out, a young Navy corpsman walked up and shook my hand. "Sir," he said, "you didn't just win your case. You gave us a reason to fight for our own." And in that moment, I knew, this story had never been about just one courtroom. It was about all the places where dignity was tested, and finally, restored. And for the first time in a long time, the system stood taller, because we did.